Hey everybody, this is Erica with Confident Parenting. I wanted to pop on and address some of the questions that you guys asked about 2 weeks ago. I asked you to tell me some of your burning questions and what kind of things you were struggling with sleep. And we got a lot of replies. Unfortunately, I forgot how hectic the end of the school year is and how hectic life is when there's no school and no camp. So it took me until now to address some of your questions, but I had a few minutes and I wanted to hop on and do that. So I'll be popping on and getting to as many questions as I can, but the one that we seem to get the most, I guess the most common theme was preschoolers that are having trouble falling asleep at bedtime and suddenly. So Lindsay said, I'm seeing a lot of people in multiple groups post recently about difficulty getting kids to settle at night and go to sleep, that odd age between 2 and 3 where they still seem to need a nap, yet if they nap, they can't settle at night. And several others jumped on and agreed. Dana, Allison, and Laura said, yes, 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 this. So the first thing I would say is you are not alone in struggling to get your preschooler to fall asleep at bedtime. It's really common. As I answer these questions, just keep in mind, excuse me, that I don't have a whole lot of information here, so I'll try to give you the best answer that I can, but realize that I don't have all the details, so what I recommend might not be the perfect fit for your particular child. It is really common in the older 2s and especially the 3s that your child will still be willing to take a decent nap or sometimes even a monster nap, but then really struggle to fall asleep at bedtime. And what happens often is that bedtime starts getting pushed later and later and later, and then they either get not enough total sleep overnight or waking at their same morning wake time, or as you mentioned, Lindsay, sometimes they start to even wake earlier the next morning, and then they're really not getting the same total of sleep that they used to get before. So I wouldn't say that all 3-year-olds are ready to stop napping. Like I said, I don't want to make statements across the board. I don't know enough about your child, but I would say that in my opinion, if your preschooler's nap is starting to interfere with a well-timed bedtime, it may be time to experiment with either limiting the nap or possibly even dropping the nap. So what I find with that age group is that there's usually a length of nap or an ending time on the clock that needs to happen in order for bedtime to go smoothly. And for some kids, you are going to be able to limit the length or ending time of the nap and still have a bedtime that falls at a decent time on the clock. And for others, if they get any amount of nap, even if it's just conking out for 20 minutes, you're still going to have trouble at bedtime. But my preference would always be to try to experiment with limiting the nap before completely dropping it. For example, you might find that your preschooler is willing to take a 2.5 hour nap or an hour and a half nap, and that completely messes up bedtime. But what would happen if you woke them up after an hour, or what would happen if you woke them up after 45 minutes? If you could find a happy compromise that could kind of take the edge off and help them get to a bedtime that falls at a decent time, around the time that was working for them before, gets them the right total amount of sleep overnight, then limiting and waking them up would be my preference. However, if you have the kind of child that either can't be woken up from a nap, which sometimes happens, or is such a bear to wake up from a nap that you aren't willing to do that, or finally, if you have that one that I mentioned before, that any amount of nap prevents a decent bedtime, then your option is probably going to be to eliminate the nap and to get back to a decent bedtime. What else did I want to say about that? Couple things I would be cautious about if you do decide to drop your preschooler's nap. Number one, they're still going to act like they need a nap. So this is where we get really confused. When I tell parents we're going to drop the nap, we're going to make it to bedtime and get through this adjustment, they say to me, but my child's still really tired by late afternoon. Don't panic over that. That doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. This is an adjustment. So they're having to go from the schedule that used to work towards a new schedule that they don't quite fit yet. They have to grow into it. And any adjustment from more naps to less naps, whether it's 3 to 2, 2 to 1, 1 to none, is just that. It's an adjustment for your child's body, and it is going to take time until they stop feeling sleepy in the mid to late afternoon. So don't let that necessarily make you panic that you're doing the wrong thing. Hi, Holly. Thanks for joining. So that's the first thing. Don't panic over that. The second thing, if you do decide to drop the nap to protect bedtime, be really careful about what I would call sabotage naps. And those are the naps where you're, in the car, in the stroller, in the late afternoon, heading home to start dinner, and your preschooler falls asleep. And because they did, now bedtime is all messed up again. So as much as humanly possible, you're going to want to try to keep a close eye on them and prevent being in places with motion, and just until they get fully through this adjustment. The other thing that I'd be really careful about if you do decide to drop the nap is that when your child's no longer napping, their overnight sleep totals tend to go up a little bit. So where a lot of us fall down in this transition is we skip the nap, keep bedtime in the same place, and not only does that make the adjustment harder, but then our child's not getting the right total amount of sleep night after night after night, and that starts to accumulate. And then in the end, you have a really hot mess child that never made it through the adjustment. So with the nap, your preschooler probably needs about 10.5 hours of sleep overnight. And these are just generic averages. They might not fit your child specifically. Without the nap, the overnight sleep totals tend to go up by about an hour. So if you were to leave bedtime in the same place, they could be losing up to an hour of sleep overnight. So I prefer, at least until they get through the transition, and maybe even permanently going forward because of the higher overnight sleep needs, to shift bedtime up by about 30 to 60 minutes, so that not only are they not having to go so late on the clock, but you're kind of offsetting what they're missing during the day, and they can get that right total of sleep night after night after night, which will help with the adjustment too. If they're waking too early in the morning, especially if that's a new thing, that earlier bedtime should help if you give it enough time to kick in. I know that sounds really crazy. It's very counterintuitive. We tend to think that the later we put our child down, the later they'll sleep the next morning. Unfortunately, babies and kids don't agree with that. They usually do the opposite. So usually the earlier you put them down, with some exceptions, the appropriately earlier you put them down, the better wake time you'll get the following morning. So if you're also having an early wake time problem along with the nap issue and the bedtime issue, then the earlier bedtime should really help with that. What else did I want to say about that? Let me think. Okay, so hopefully for those of you that were struggling with the preschoolers and the naps, that will help. If your child is in daycare or school, that's a little bit of a harder scenario. They may or may not be able to work with you to try to experiment with limiting the nap or dropping the nap. There's no perfect solution for that. I would try to express to them all the struggles that it's causing for you at night, and how tired it's making your child, which I'm sure they're seeing throughout the day, and just see if you can kind of get them on board to help you out with that. Along with this, some of you also mentioned, particularly Victoria, you mentioned that your daughter is 2 and is fighting her naps. That may be a different situation, so I wanted to make sure to include that in this same video. I do caution parents to be really careful, especially with the younger 2s. If they do suddenly stop fighting their nap, don't be too quick to assume that they are ready to stop napping as compared to maybe a much older 2 or a 3-year-old. It's really common, especially in the early 2s, for children to go on what we call a nap strike, which is just exactly what it sounds like. It's a boycott of the nap, just like when workers go on strike. Because of all the development that's going on around that time and the strong will that they start to develop at that time, 2-year-olds often go on periods of skipping their naps, and it does not necessarily mean that they're ready to stop napping entirely. If your child were to be on a nap strike and you assumed that it was the end of naps and followed all the advice that I just mentioned, and it's really too soon for them, you could again run into a hot mess situation where they really can't get through that adjustment because they weren't totally ready. So I would be much more cautious with the younger 2s, and assuming that nap struggles or bedtime struggles means that they're ready to drop the nap, as compared to how I feel about the 3s. Victoria, if your 2-year-old has decided to stop napping, first I would say try to wait it out. Try to stick to a set nap time every day and keep her in there for a set period of time, whatever you feel comfortable with. If she used to nap for 2 hours, that does not mean you have to leave her in there for 2 hours, but I would give it a really solid attempt to give her a chance to go to sleep. Another thing you can do when your child's on a nap strike is use some sort of backup method to keep her as rested as possible. If you know that the crib is just not going to happen on any given day or during a certain period, temporarily it is okay to hop in the car, hop in the stroller. The quality of sleep is not as great, but in a period where your child's fighting sleep entirely, I feel that some sleep is better than no sleep. So you could try to sort of tank her up using one of those options just until you feel like maybe she's calming down with all the development, and try again for the crib. If your child's on a nap strike and you aren't able to tank them up during the day in any way and they totally skip the nap or take a super short nap, then again, I would go with an earlier bedtime to try to offset that. You don't want too much overtiredness to accumulate, and then it can be really hard to come out of those phases, and then your child starts needing more and more help to fall to sleep and back to sleep, and that causes its own problems. So just to kind of clarify, 2-year-olds very commonly will fight their naps. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to stop napping. I would try to wait that out. Nap strikes can last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. So I would, again, not be too quick to assume that they're ready to finish napping. Oftentimes a normal nap will resume within a few days to a few weeks for the early 2s. For the later 2s and the 3s, if the nap is preventing a decent bedtime from happening, decent bedtime meaning they can't get their appropriate total hours of sleep by the time they wake the next morning. And for most of them, that's going to be at least 10.5, if not more, along with the nap. Then I would vote to either limit or eliminate the nap if necessary to protect bedtime and to make sure that they get the right total number of hours overnight. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful for some of you that were wondering about the preschoolers and the bedtime struggles. There are, of course, other reasons that your preschooler might be fighting bedtime, things having to do with the routine, consistency, testing limits, so maybe we can address those in another video. Hopefully this helps. Let me know, and I'll be back in not too long to answer some of your other questions. Thanks, guys.